So imagine you've just, completely aced your C2 English exam.
Right. The ultimate goal for so many learners.
Exactly. I mean, you've spent years drilling grammar, you know every obscure vocabulary word, you've mastered the subjunctive mood, and the examiner has officially certified you as perfectly 100% fluent.
You're practically a walking dictionary at that point.
Totally. So you walk out of the testing center, right?
Yes.
And you head into a pub to celebrate with some native speaking friends. You sit down, get a drink, and you decide to tell them a story about a nightmare train ride you had that morning.
A classic pub scenario, yeah.
Right. So you start speaking. And your grammar is just flawless. Your pronunciation is crisp. But halfway through the story, you notice people's eyes kind of glazing over.
Oh, the worst feeling.
It really is.
Yeah.
Somebody checks their phone. Another person takes this really long sip of their drink and just starts looking at the door. You are speaking the language perfectly, but you have completely lost the room.
Yeah, you're functionally fluent, but socially invisible.
Exactly. So why does that happen? Because transmitting data with perfect grammar and actually telling a captivating story are, well, two entirely different neurological and linguistic skills. Okay, let's unpack this, because having flawless grammar does not automatically make you a good storyteller.
No, it really doesn't. And that's exactly what we're looking at today. It's that massive gap between mechanical proficiency, right, and genuine human connection.
Which is so frustrating for advanced learners.
Extremely frustrating. When we look at the audio program we're pulling from today, the entire focus is on bridging that specific gap. We are dissecting advanced conversational skills. Basically, we're taking apart the mechanics of what makes an audience lean in rather than, tune out.
I love that, leaning in. So if you're joining us today, you are likely the kind of learner who really appreciates dissecting these subtle social dynamics. You want to understand the hidden architecture of communication.
Right, moving from just being a flawless language operator to an actual master storyteller.
Spot on. So our mission for this deep dive is to extract the exact linguistic pillars that take a sterile chronological recounting of events and transform it into a vivid, magnetic experience. We are going to explore why your flawless grammar is actually, in some cases, the very thing standing in your way.
Yeah, and the source material diagnoses this core problem by introducing a really fascinating concept called anecdotal fluency.
Anecdotal fluency. I like the sound of that.
It's widely considered the ultimate litmus test for a true C2 speaker, far beyond any written test you could take.
Because life isn't a multiple choice test, right?
Exactly. Anecdotal fluency is basically the ability to recount a lived experience, maybe a frustrating commute, a bizarre interaction at a grocery store, or some complex sequence of events at work, and relay it in a way that is engaging, culturally resonant, and most importantly, emotionally accurate.
Emotionally accurate, that's a great term. But the trap that highly advanced learners fall into is what the analysis calls sounding forensic.
Forensic, yes.
I want to unpack what is happening in the brain when a learner defaults to this forensic style. Because when you tell a story forensically, you sound like a police officer giving a report on the witness stand.
Just sticking to the cold, hard facts.
Exactly. The example provided in the material highlights this perfectly. A learner attempting to tell a story about a stressful commute might say, "First, I went to the station, then the train was late. Because of that, I was stressed."
Which, to be fair, is grammatically flawless.
Sure, yeah. But it's completely dead on arrival at a dinner party.
Oh, absolutely. And we have to look at the cognitive load of a second language speaker to really understand why this happens. When you're operating in a non-native language, your working memory is just heavily, heavily taxed.
You're juggling so much all at once.
Right. You're actively scanning for the correct vocabulary, you're monitoring your subject-verb agreement, and you're consciously shaping your pronunciation. Because your brain is dedicating so much bandwidth to accuracy, it defaults to the most mathematically simple structure available to organize the narrative.
Which is strict chronological order. First this, then that.
Exactly. It's essentially a defense mechanism against making mistakes.
It's a survival tactic. You cling to the linear path because it's predictable. But while it is a very safe path for the speaker, it is a profoundly boring path for the listener. It transmits the data, sure, but it entirely strips away the character of the experience.
Right. It's all skeleton, no meat.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of reading the nutritional label on a candy bar instead of actually eating the candy.
Oh, that's a brilliant analogy.
When you read the label, you receive all the factual data, right? The exact grams of sugar, the carbohydrate count, the calories. But you aren't experiencing the joy or the texture or the flavor of the chocolate. You are simply being informed that the chocolate exists.
And, a nutritional label only engages the analytical processing centers of the listener's brain. When you speak forensically, you are inadvertently asking your audience to process your story as a data set.
Here are the coordinates of my morning.
Exactly. But human beings, we don't connect over data sets. We connect through shared emotional states and narrative arcs. So being purely forensic, it creates this sterile barrier. You hold the listener at arm's length, essentially delivering a boardroom presentation about your personal life, rather than bringing them into your world.
But wait, I'm kind of stuck on this idea of priority, though. If someone is speaking a second language and navigating all the latent anxiety that comes with that massive cognitive load, shouldn't absolute clarity be the baseline goal?
Well, yes and no.
Because if I try to inject too much color or, complexity into my story, I risk losing the thread, stumbling over my words, and confusing the listener entirely.
Yeah.
Doesn't the data transmission have to come first?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, clarity of data is the goal of an intermediate learner. By the time you reach the C2 level, or if you're striving for absolute mastery, data transmission is a given. You already have the tools to be clear.
Okay. The baseline has shifted.
Right. The priority shifts from proving your competence to proving your charisma. If you only prioritize factual clarity, you remain an outsider. You are essentially a highly functioning tourist in the language.
A highly functioning tourist?
Yeah.
Wow.
To become an insider, you have to use the language to forge a social bond.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires abandoning the safety of that chronological police report.
Which means we need to study how master storytellers actually initiate that social bond. Because if starting with, first I went to the station, instantly kills the vibe, we have to look at the architecture of the hook.
A hook is everything.
It really is. Native speakers, when they are functioning as natural storytellers, almost never start chronologically. I mean, you very rarely sit down at a dinner party and hear someone begin a story with, yesterday morning at 9 a.m.
No, never.
Yeah.
Yesterday morning is a timestamp. It's an administrative detail.
Yeah.
It asks absolutely nothing of the listener.
Right.
Master storytellers pull the audience in by establishing an immediate baseline of engagement using specific conversational markers. The material highlights phrases like, "You are not going to believe the absolute ordeal I had yesterday," or "the incredibly effective, picture the scene."
Oh, picture the scene is brilliant because it functions as a direct command to the listener's visual cortex. You are not asking them to listen to a timeline. You are instructing their brain to render a three-dimensional environment.
Exactly.
You're demanding their active participation before you have even provided a single detail about what actually happened.
And the other structural tactic highlighted in the material is the technique of starting in media resing, dropping the listener squarely in the middle of the action. This relies heavily on a very specific grammatical choice, which is the past continuous tense.
Ah, right, the past continuous.
The provided example demonstrates this beautifully. Someone says, "So there I was, minding my own business, waiting for this perpetually delayed train."
The use of the past continuous of their minding, waiting it, creates a completely different atmospheric effect than just the simple past tense.
It really does.
Because if you say, I waited, it sounds like a completed, isolated event, but I was waiting paints this continuous, unresolved backdrop. It makes the listener feel like the scene is currently unfolding right around them.
Yes, like they're standing on the platform with you.
It's the narrative equivalent of a cinematic tracking shot. You never start an action film by showing the protagonist waking up, making coffee, and filling out paperwork at the police academy.
You fall asleep in the theater.
Exactly. The movie opens with the protagonist already hanging off the side of a speeding train.
Mm-hmm.
The audience is dropped into the chaos, and the storyteller just trusts them to orient themselves.
What's fascinating here is that we need to analyze a very specific idiomatic chunk in that example, because the material isolates it as a cornerstone of advanced narrative setup. And that is the phrase, "minding my own business."
Oh, I say that all the time.
Right. From a linguistic standpoint, this phrase does heavy lifting. It establishes what we can call a baseline of normality.
It sets the stage for the disruption, right?
Exactly.
If you tell someone you are minding your own business, it subconsciously triggers a recognized narrative pattern in their brain because the listener instantly knows that the story is not actually about you minding your business.
Nobody tells a story about successfully minding their business.
No. The phrase only exists to provide a contrast to the sheer chaos that is about to follow. It primes the audience for a disaster.
You are manipulating their expectations, generating instant anticipation. If you simply say, I was standing on the platform, the listener has no idea where the narrative is heading.
It could be anything.
Right. It could be a story about seeing a beautiful bird or bumping into an old friend or simply experiencing a moment of quiet reflection. But the moment you deploy minding my own business, you narrow the narrative possibilities down to an imminent, likely absurd disruption.
You have hooked their curiosity because now they desperately need to know what broke that baseline of normality.
Exactly. And once you have hooked them, and they are actively waiting for that disruption, the vocabulary you use to describe the ensuing chaos has to match that heightened anticipation.
Which brings us to a major linguistic leap required for C2 storytelling. And this one is tough. It's expanding your lexical range by completely eliminating the word very.
Yes. The material is unrelenting on this point.
It really is. If you want to paint a vivid picture, very is the enemy.
It is. Because the word very is an incredibly useful crutch during the intermediate stages of language acquisition. It is mathematically efficient.
What do you mean by mathematically efficient?
Well, it allows a learner with a limited vocabulary to modulate the intensity of the few adjectives they already possess. If you know the word big, you can instantly describe a multitude of things by simply adding very big. If you know the word tired, you can communicate exhaustion by saying very tired.
Right, it's a multiplier. But efficiency does not equal resonance. Saying a train platform was very crowded is a literal, factual description of human density. It communicates data.
Data again, yes.
But advanced storytelling requires evocative imagery that triggers a sensory response in the listener. The material provides a clear upgrade path here, which I love. Instead of relying on very crowded, the target phrasing shifts to idioms like packed to the rafters or, you couldn't move for people.
Oh, I love you couldn't move for people. It's so visceral.
It really is. And instead of saying you were very tired after the ordeal, you describe yourself as running on empty or utterly exhausted.
Notice the transition there from literal modifiers to figurative imagery.
Yeah.
Packed to the rafters forces the listener's brain to conjure a visual of a space so suffocatingly full that human beings are theoretically shoved up into the wooden beams of the ceiling.
It's such an intense image.
Right. And running on empty maps, the biological sensation of exhaustion onto the mechanical imagery of a car engine sputtering out its final fumes. This is the implementation of hyperbole. You're slightly exaggerating the physical reality to amplify the emotional reality.
This is where I struggle with the concept, though, from a purely practical standpoint.
Okay, how so?
Well, if I am at a coffee shop and it is simply busy, maybe every table is full, there is a line out the door describing it as packed to the rafters is technically, factually incorrect. There's no one in the rafters.
Obviously not, yeah.
So if we are trying to build trust and connection with an audience, why would we utilize hyperbole, which is essentially lying? Doesn't the listener register that exaggeration and view the speaker as an unreliable narrator?
That concern is deeply rooted in the forensic mindset, where mathematical accuracy is the highest virtue of communication. But storytelling operates under a completely different social contract.
A social contract, okay.
Yeah. When a native or C2 speaker uses an idiom like packed to the rafters, the listener's brain does not process it as a literal spatial claim. They don't look around for people in the ceiling. The recognized social contract of hyperbole is that the speaker is bypassing literal truth to deliver emotional truth.
The emotional truth being the feeling of claustrophobia rather than the exact head count of the room.
Exactly. By using hyperbole, you are communicating the internal reality of how the environment impacted you. You felt overwhelmed. You felt boxed in.
Right.
The literal phrase, very crowded, only informs the listener that a crowd existed. The hyperbolic phrase, packed to the rafters, invites the listener to experience the suffocation with you. The slight exaggeration bridges the gap between the external facts of the event and your internal psychological state.
So it transforms the recounting of an event into a shared emotional simulation.
Precisely. You are abandoning the sterile facts to honor the genuine feeling.
Okay, so we've built the foundation. We have the hook that starts in media res. We have established the baseline of normality to build anticipation. And we have upgraded our mental dictionary to utilize hyperbolic, visually evocative language.
The toolkit is assembled.
But having the right words in your arsenal is really only half the battle, because the material heavily emphasizes that how you physically deliver those words dictates the success of the story.
Delivery is everything.
A story is not merely a spoken essay, right? It is a live performance. And this requires an absolute mastery of pacing and the strategic signposting of emotion.
This is where we see a huge difference between proficiency levels.
Yeah.
At lower levels of language proficiency, the pacing is dictated by cognitive limitation. When a B1 or B2 speaker pauses in the middle of a sentence, it almost universally signifies a gap in vocabulary or a frantic mental search for the correct grammatical structure.
Right, it's completely involuntary.
Exactly. It communicates hesitation and it breaks the listener's immersion.
It manifests as the dreaded or while the speaker's eyes dart toward the ceiling, mentally flipping through flashcards trying to find the word for umbrella.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
But at the C2 level, a pause ceases to be a symptom of a deficit. It becomes a tactical weapon.
A weapon, I like that.
Advanced speakers manipulate the rhythm of their delivery to artificially build tension. They employ rhetorical pauses and specific filler phrases, not because they are lost, but because they are guiding the listener's neurological response.
They are controlling the flow.
Yes. The material provides concrete examples of these pacing markers. A speaker might say, and then, out of nowhere followed by a deliberate 2-second pause, before delivering the climax, the heavens opened and it started pouring rain.
And other signpost phrases detailed in the material include things like, next thing I knew, or the incredibly classic, lo and behold.
Oh, lo and behold is a great one.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because these phrases operate exactly like a drum roll in a live musical performance.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
Right. If you go to a symphony, the snare drum roll is not the main melodic event. It is technically filler noise, but its sole purpose is to instruct the audience's nervous system to pay attention. It builds a crescendo of anticipation so that when the final cymbal crash actually happens, it hits with maximum impact.
It sets the stage for the impact.
Exactly. If the cymbal crashed in a silent room without the preceding drum roll, it would just be a jarring, unpleasant noise. The drum roll provides the context for the impact.
And if you stretch that linguistic drum roll out just a fraction of a second longer than is strictly comfortable, you generate genuine suspense. When you deploy a phrase like, next thing I knew, and then you hold the floor in total silence for 2 seconds, you are demonstrating supreme linguistic dominance.
Dominance, wow.
You are signaling to the audience that you are entirely comfortable in the language. You're not rushing to fill the void out of nervousness. You are essentially saying, I own this conversational space, I have your undivided attention, and I'm going to make you wait for the payoff.
Which requires an immense amount of confidence, because silence in a second language is terrifying.
Oh, absolutely paralyzing.
The instinct is to speak as fast as possible to get to the end of the sentence before you make a mistake or forget a word. But embracing the pause proves that you are no longer surviving the language, you are conducting it.
Conducting it, yes. And that cymbal crash, the payoff that follows the pause, is almost always a moment of profound disruption or failure.
Because perfect eyes don't make good stories.
Exactly. The architecture of a compelling anecdote relies on conflict. A story about a perfectly executed morning where the train arrived on time, the coffee was hot, and everyone was polite is not a story. It is an itinerary.
An itinerary, yeah. Who wants to listen to an itinerary?
No one. The narrative only becomes valuable when the speaker slips on a wet floor, spills the hot coffee on a stranger, and realizes they are on the wrong train entirely.
Which forces us to examine one of the most complex cultural hallmarks detailed in the material, which is the linguistic navigation of misfortune.
This is crucial, especially for English.
When disaster strikes, how does a C2 speaker recount it? The material identifies a distinct, highly sophisticated trait, particularly prominent in American and British English, and that is the deployment of ironic detachment and self-deprecation.
Yes.
When a master storyteller recounts an absolute disaster, they do not just vent their anger, they frame the catastrophe ironically.
The material offers excellent examples of this framing. Imagine you organized a corporate event, right? And the catering didn't show up, the microphone broke, and the keynote speaker just walked out. A native speaker recounting this nightmare the next day might say, so, as you can imagine, that went down an absolute storm.
Using the idiom went down a storm, which traditionally means something was a massive success, but delivering it with a tonal heaviness that implies it was an apocalyptic failure.
Exactly. Or they might frame it by saying, it was a masterclass in how not to organize an event.
I want you to consider the vast psychological difference between saying that and simply stating the forensic facts, like, the event was badly organized, everything broke, and I was furious.
Stating I was furious is a regression to the police report. It transmits the data of your emotional state, but it completely strips away all nuance, charm, and social awareness. And more importantly, it places a heavy cognitive and emotional burden on the listener.
This is a fascinating dynamic to me. If the ultimate goal of storytelling is to communicate our emotional truth, and the emotional truth of the failed event is genuine, boiling rage, why is expressing that rage considered a linguistic failure?
Which is a great question.
Why is masking the anger with irony considered a superpower? Shouldn't authenticity be the primary objective here?
This raises an important question about social dynamics. Authenticity is vital, sure, but raw, unmitigated complaining violates the social contract of casual conversation. When you spend 10 minutes passionately outlining exactly how furious and victimized you were by the broken microphone and the missing caterer, you trap the listener in a negative emotional loop.
You're holding them hostage, basically.
Right. They are forced into a position of having to manage your emotional state. They have to offer platitudes, they have to comfort you, or they simply have to sit there and absorb your toxicity. It is socially exhausting.
It drains the energy from the room. The listener stops enjoying the story and starts merely enduring it.
Precisely.
Right.
But self-deprecation completely inverts that power dynamic. When you use ironic detachment to mock your own misfortune, you invite the listener to laugh at the absurdity of the situation with you, rather than forcing them to shoulder your anger.
So it's inclusive.
Very inclusive. You are taking a moment of victimization where the world treated you poorly, and you are retroactively taking control of it.
You are signaling to the group, yes, the universe handed me an absolute disaster yesterday, but my ego is secure enough, and my perspective is broad enough that I can package that disaster into entertainment for all of us.
You win the interaction by refusing to be defeated by the facts.
Wow, I love that. You win the interaction.
It is the ultimate display of resilience. Misfortune ceases to be a trauma and becomes mere material for your performance.
But mastering this specific flavor of irony requires immense emotional intelligence, doesn't it? And a deep well of cultural fluency.
Yes, you have to understand the subtle tonal shifts required to indicate that you are joking without explicitly saying, hey, I'm making a joke.
Which kills the joke instantly.
Exactly. This is why ironic self-deprecation is the hallmark of the elusive C2 level. It proves you understand the unwritten psychological rules of the language, not just the grammar syntax.
Okay, so let's map out where we are in the narrative arc. You have hooked the audience with a command to visualize their surroundings. You have painted a vivid scene using hyperbolic imagery, leaving the word very behind. You have paced your delivery using drum rolls and calculated silences to build tension. And you have delivered the punchline of your disaster with perfect ironic detachment, neutralizing the negativity and getting the entire table to laugh.
A textbook execution.
Right. You have achieved total anecdotal fluency. You are holding the room in the palm of your hand. But the story is over. The punchline has landed. What happens next?
This is where even seasoned native speakers can stumble. The laughter fades, the tension dissipates, and if you are not careful, a creeping, awkward silence begins to fill the void.
Oh, that post-joke silence is brutal.
It is. The performance has concluded, but you have not officially released the audience.
The material dedicates a critical section to this exact vulnerability, which it calls landing the plane. It outlines the absolute necessity of the concluding mechanism. A story cannot simply stop when the facts run out. It must be seamlessly wrapped up to transition the group back into a normal conversational flow.
You need a linguistic signal that functions as the curtain dropping at the end of a play. The material highlights a specific technique for this, which is summarizing the core absurdity or the underlying lesson of the narrative using established C2 idioms. They provide phrases like, long story short, we eventually made it, or, so at the end of the day, it was a character-building experience, to say the least.
I really love the analysis of the phrase, to say the least. It is such a quiet, unassuming add-on, but it performs a vital structural function. When you append, to say the least, to the end of a wild hyperbolic story, you are essentially winking at the audience.
Exactly, winking at the audience.
You are acknowledging the exaggerated, colorful language you use throughout the performance, and you are grounding it back in reality.
Another incredibly effective concluding mechanism highlighted is the phrase, needless to say, I won't be making that mistake again.
It makes me think of watching an Olympic gymnast executing a flawless floor routine. They are sprinting, tumbling, executing complex mid-air twists, and the crowd is completely mesmerized. But if they come down from that final flip and stumble, taking a massive step backward on the mat, the illusion of perfection is instantly shattered.
That step is all you remember.
That stumble is the only thing the judges and the audience will remember. Concluding mechanisms are the linguistic equivalent of sticking the landing. They lock the narrative arc into place and leave a final impression of total control.
But these concluding mechanisms serve a secondary, arguably more important, sociological function. They do not just terminate your story, they act as an invitation. We have to remember that conversation is fundamentally a reciprocal act. It is a game of catch.
Right.
When you embark on a 5-minute anecdote, you have caught the ball and you are holding it. You are dominating the shared space.
You have monopolized the group's attention.
Exactly. When you deploy a wrap-up phrase like, "Needless to say, I won't be making that mistake again," you are actively signaling that your turn is over. You are seamlessly handing the conversational baton back to the listener.
It provides them with a clear, socially safe entry point.
Yes. The mechanism effectively says, "I have finished my performance. The floor is now open for your reaction."
It gives them the cue to laugh, to offer sympathy, or ideally to say, "Oh my goodness, I know exactly how you feel." Something incredibly similar happened to me at an event last year, and launch into their own story.
It keeps the momentum going.
It is an act of conversational generosity. You enjoyed your time in the spotlight, and now you are gracefully stepping aside to let someone else shine.
It restores the equilibrium. You move from a one-sided performance back to a balanced, reciprocal dialogue.
So what does this all mean for the listener? We have completely deconstructed the architecture of a masterclass story. We know the theory, we understand the cognitive load, the social contracts, and the neurological impact of pacing. But understanding the theory of how a combustion engine works does not mean you can instantly build a car.
Definitely not.
How do you actually bridge the gap between intellectually understanding these techniques and instinctively executing them in real time?
The material anticipates this exact hurdle and dedicates its final focus to actionable implementation, which comes down to rewiring the brain through active practice. You cannot passively absorb anecdotal fluency.
Right, you can't just listen to a podcast or a deep dive, I should say, and suddenly be a master storyteller.
Exactly. You have to force your neurological pathways to adopt these new structural habits.
The actionable takeaway provided is a specific exercise. The material instructs the learner to take a completely mundane, recent event, maybe a delayed flight, a frustrating mix-up at a local coffee shop, a minor miscommunication with a colleague, and practice recounting it out loud, actively forcing the integration of the advanced markers we have discussed.
And the out loud component is non-negotiable. Reading a flashcard with the phrase, "minding my own business," will help you identify it on a multiple choice reading comprehension exam. But it will do absolutely nothing to help you deploy it organically in the middle of a chaotic dinner party.
Let's actually walk through what this practice looks like in real time, because I think it's crucial to see the transformation.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's say my mundane event is that I went to a bakery yesterday. They gave me a blueberry muffin instead of chocolate chip. And when I took a bite on the street, a pigeon flew into my shoulder and I dropped it.
A tragedy.
An absolute tragedy. So if I am a learner trapped in the forensic mindset, I would probably practice saying, "Yesterday I went to the bakery. I ordered chocolate, but they gave me blueberry. Then a bird hit me. I dropped the food. I was very annoyed."
Which is perfectly grammatical, completely understandable, and entirely forgettable. If you are doing the active practice exercise, you have to consciously break that structure apart. You have to look at your forensic draft and ask, where's the hook? Where's the baseline of normality? Where is the hyperbole?
Okay, so I am practicing out loud in my living room. I need to force the hook. I will abandon. Yesterday, I went to the bakery. Instead, I will command the listener's attention. I will say, "Picture the scene. It's Tuesday morning. I am running on empty."
Excellent. You have eliminated the timestamp, engaged their visual cortex, and replaced "very tired" with a hyperbolic idiom. Now, establish the baseline of normality using the past continuous.
So there I was, minding my own business, walking down the street with what I thought was my highly anticipated chocolate chip muffin.
You have introduced the contrast. The listener knows the piece is about to be shattered. Now, insert the pacing mechanism. Give me the drum roll before the disaster.
I take a bite, realize it's blueberry, and I'll pause for 2 seconds. Next thing I knew, this massive pigeon dive bombs my shoulder out of nowhere.
The pause creates the tension, and next thing I knew, signposts the chaos. Now, land the plane using ironic detachment. Do not tell me you were annoyed.
The muffin hits the pavement, so as you can imagine, that was an absolute masterclass in how to start a Tuesday. Long story short, the local wildlife had a better breakfast than I did.
Wow. You have completely transformed the narrative. You took a mundane, data-driven report about a baked good in a bird, and you crafted a self-deprecating, paced, highly visual performance that hands the conversation back to the listener on a laugh.
But the material adds a final layer to this practice that I know is going to make people cringe.
Oh yes, the recording.
Yes. It suggests that to truly perfect this, you must record yourself on your phone while doing this exercise, listen back to it, and critique your own rhythm. I have to admit, and I think almost every listener will agree with me, hearing a recording of your own voice is a universally excruciating experience.
It's the absolute worst.
It triggers an immediate visceral discomfort. Is this level of self-torture genuinely necessary to achieve C2 fluency?
The discomfort is exactly why it is necessary. The reason we hate hearing our own voices is because the recording strips away the internal resonance we experience in our own skulls, revealing the stark, objective reality of how we sound to the outside world.
Which is usually much less smooth than we thought.
Exactly. When you are speaking a second language in real time, your brain is operating at maximum capacity. You are simultaneously generating vocabulary, monitoring syntax, and managing social anxiety. Because you are so deeply embedded in the cognitive effort of production, you possess zero objective awareness of your pacing.
You feel like you are pausing for dramatic effect, but in reality, you are rushing.
Precisely. You might think you left a brilliant 2-second rhetorical pause before the punchline, but the recording will reveal that you panicked and filled the silence with an after half a second. You might think you sounded ironically detached, but the recording reveals you sounded genuinely bitter.
And you can't fix what you can't hear.
You cannot course correct a rhythm you cannot hear. By recording yourself, you externalize the performance. You step outside of your own cognitive load and assume the role of the audience.
You have to suffer through hearing the absence of the drum roll to realize how desperately the story needs it. It builds an auditory muscle memory.
It bridges the final gap between theoretical knowledge and instinctual execution. It is the crucible where forensic habits are finally burned away, leaving only the polished mechanics of storytelling.
It is a remarkable evolution. Let's take a breath and retrace the journey we have just taken through the architecture of communication. We started by diagnosing the fatal flaw of advanced language learners, which is the retreat into the forensic chronological police report, where a desperate need for perfect data transmission creates a sterile barrier between speaker and listener.
Right, the nutritional label.
Yes. We learned to shatter that barrier by abandoning timestamps and utilizing powerful hooks, demanding the audience's visual engagement.
We explore the structural necessity of the past continuous tense to drop the listener in media res, and the psychological power of establishing a baseline of normality, minding our own business, simply to build the anticipation of its destruction.
We confronted the cognitive weakness of the word very, actively upgrading our internal lexicon to embrace hyperbolic, evocative idioms that communicate emotional truth over spatial mathematics.
And we dissected the neurobiology of pacing, understanding how deliberate silences and linguistic drum rolls manipulate the listener's tension.
We analyze the profound social utility of ironic self-deprecation, recognizing how mocking our own misfortune shifts the power dynamic, relieves the listener of an emotional burden, and establishes us as resilient narrators.
And finally, we mastered the art of landing the plane, utilizing concluding mechanisms to stick the landing and generously pass the conversational baton back to the group.
It is a comprehensive blueprint for human connection, and I think that is the most critical realization to take away from this material. We are not dissecting these techniques to trick an examiner into printing a C2 certificate.
No, a certificate is just a piece of paper. It cannot hold a conversation.
Exactly. This is about utilizing the language as a bridge rather than a shield. It is about taking the chaotic, frustrating, utterly mundane realities of your daily life and transforming them into a shared currency of entertainment. It is about proving that your personality, your humor, your resilience, your unique perspective can survive the translation process completely intact.
The grammar is merely the foundation. The storytelling is the house you actually invite people into.
That is beautifully said. Which leaves me with a final, slightly philosophical thought for you to chew on today. We have spent this entire hour deconstructing how you must adopt the specific storytelling quirks of a language, the hyperbole, the strategic pacing, the ironic detachment in order to achieve ultimate fluency. You have to train your brain to filter your experiences through these specific cultural lenses. But it makes me wonder, if you dedicate years to this practice, does mastering the language eventually rewrite your underlying personality?
Oh, that's a deep question.
Think about the mechanics of the self-deprecation we discussed. If you actively train yourself day after day to take your daily misfortunes, the delayed trains, the spilled coffees, the ruined presentations, and immediately package them not as sources of genuine anger, but as entertaining, ironic anecdotes designed to make your friends laugh.
Wait, do you inadvertently become a more resilient person?
You're reframing your own trauma.
Exactly. Does the linguistic requirement to find the humor in a disaster actually change the way your brain's amygdala processes stress? By forcing yourself to speak like a master storyteller, do you eventually write yourself into a happier narrative? Keep that in mind the next time you're simply minding your own business and the world decides to go entirely wrong. Until next time.